Hey, how you doing there, Portland? This is Ray Lane with Halfcast on TalkCastPDX.com. How are you doing today? Had a special guest here this morning. We're going to talk about a few things. Mr. Russell Glaser. You there, Russ?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome to have you on the show. Did some, there you are. Yes, I can see you there. Did some research that you're a gemologist, but also you're a mycologist. I'm saying it right? Mycologist?
Mycologist. Yeah, that's the
Yes. The,
study of mushrooms, fungi.
yeah, the art of, studying mushrooms. I just saw recently on Netflix a wonderful documentary on mushrooms. It just blew me away how they break things down in the forest and everything, and their role in life, and just the interwoven. Speaks. If you wouldn't mind, just give us a little overview of what you do and what your understanding of the importance and the role that mushrooms play or fungi plays uh, in our lives.
Well, I think the movie that you're referring to is actually called Fantastic Fungi, and
Fantastic fungi, wonderful.
it's a pretty interesting movie that I would highly recommend to people that have even a passing interest in mushrooms or nature in general, but that the movie was made in 2019 by Louis Schwartzberg, who is actually the world's foremost time-lapse cinematographer,
Yeah,
and it shows some pretty incredible sequences of mushrooms actually like growing,
yeah,
actively growing and sporulating and propagating, and it's a very cool movie. There's a lot of good information in there. I highly recommend it now that it's on Netflix. It seems like it's getting a lot of traction, but for me,
it's
that was
really
a
brilliant.
it's really great, and just
It
like
really
the
is.
visual components are just amazing. The information that's given is pretty accurate
Yeah,
and well presented. But yeah, for me, just the visuals of watching these mushrooms grow in these time lapse scenarios, they're just fantastic. Um, and actually, the film debuted here back in 2019 in Portland at the Hollywood Theater, and Louis
oh, I didn't know
Schwartzberg
that.
was,
Did
yeah,
not
he
know that.
was on hand. I attended the premiere. It was a pretty cool event. He did a
Wow.
Q&A afterwards, and he is like a really really respected figure in the Hollywood community, and one of the great cinematographers of his generation. So it is really cool that that's what he chose to um, focus on in terms of filmmaking. It was
Yeah, to give his time like that, and it was so artfully crafted, and you could tell there was passion and true artisanship in the making of this wonderful movie documentary. It had me. I was enthralled. I was so into it. I mean, it was art. It was expression. It was just beautiful. All the
yeah.
colors, all the thing, the interconnection of all the different forms of of, uh, of mushrooms. It was just, I had no idea. You
Well,
know.
I think yeah, and I think it's something that so I really have noticed that in the last like year or so with like COVID and everything, for whatever reason, mushrooms have really gained a lot of traction in the culture. People didn't have things to do, so they spent their time outside in the woods and found
Mm.
mushrooms and foraged them and things like that. And let's see if I can. Well, I'm gonna flip it upside down. There we go.
That's
Um,
fine.
yeah. So people, got into like foraging mushrooms. People, got into maybe consuming psychedelic mushrooms, things like this. When they didn't have the opportunity to go other places do other types of activities. So for whatever reason, I think that there's been, a lot of traction, a lot of interest in the public and the culture, with mushrooms. And I think that this movie was really timely, and that
Mm, mm.
that it's contributing, to the popularity and to the awareness. And there seems to be like a movement developing, and
Big time.
here in and here in Oregon, we're kind of like, maybe ground zero, in a lot of different ways. But it's really interesting. This has been, kind of my realm, my passion, for many years, and really, devoted my time and professional career, to doing this. So I'd love to, share some information, whatever,
Please.
questions you have
Do
that
you
you're
do you give
interested in.
tours? Do you take
Excuse me?
people up? Do you take people up into the mountains and teach them, or give tours?
It's a good question. I have, to this point, been reluctant to do that. It's
Mhm,
something that I would consider doing on a very like small person to person, like private,
mhm.
tutorial basis. I don't think I would want to do like classes. I've seen some people in the community doing that, but the truth is with the mushroom picking is that every person that like you take out, there's the potential for them to, take somebody else to one of your spots that,
Ah,
might be
ah,
important
ah.
to you.
Didn't think of that. Yeah.
So I guess, kind of just, covering this like a general baseline rule of thumb, kind of like
Mhm.
etiquette sort of thing, when people do get into mushroom
It's a
foraging or
very
picking.
personal world. It's a very personal world, very intimate
Well,
world.
Well, you have to do a lot of research and spend a lot of time, in the woods. You have to put a lot of miles on your tire treads and your boot treads to get to where you want to be, and learn a lot of things. So a lot of folks, feel like, hey, I earned this. I don't want to like give it away, and so there is kind of like, some etiquette about that, and that, if you take people out, you're trying to trust them that they're not going to like start showing other people,
Mm.
this specific spot, or
You
this
don't
or
want you
that.
don't want you don't want the areas over-trekked.
You don't exactly. Well, you don't, you overtrekked, overpicked. Although to some degree, like this is the interesting thing, and kind of referring back to the movie that you mentioned, like the mushroom's life cycle, starts with a spore. In fact, the mushroom itself is merely like the reproductive aspect, the reproductive organ of the organism itself, which is the mycelium, which lives underground, for mycorrhizal species, which grow with trees. Mycorrhizal meaning that they have a symbiotic relationship between the roots of the trees, the rhizosphere, and the mushroom, the mycos. So it's what happens is that the mycelium underground feed the roots of the trees, and the roots of
Mhm.
the trees feed the mushroom, and they live, together, and that
Symbiotically.
symbiotically, and that when the mushroom grows, out of the ground, it's merely, the component that will release the spores, which is like the
Right,
seeds for the mushrooms.
right.
And
Mhm.
so by doing that, it expands the footprint of the mycelium in the forest. And what's interesting about that is that, hold on one second. What's interesting about it is that we have. Kind of a function as human beings, as participants in this cycle, much as like birds and bees are pollinators for plants and flowering trees and things like this, that we, by going into the forest, by going out to the coast, by going into these zones, collecting mushrooms and carrying them around, we
They're
are functioning
germinating.
at, we're spreading the spores, and we're giving the mushroom an opportunity to increase its footprint, and
Right.
expand its mass. And so one of the things I tell people when they want to get, interested in picking or collecting mushrooms is, get a basket like this, where it allows spores
Watch
to,
it fall through
go
the wick.
through. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that. That's helpful.
beautiful.
Um, and I just,
It can also
talk.
be dangerous. It can also be a dangerous, hobby or, interest. There are I was reading that, there's if you're not really good at what you're doing, or you're not really read up and versed like someone such as yourself, you can pick something that could be very fatal to you if you were to mistake it for a common uh, mushroom, edible mushroom. there's many edible, but there are a few that are very, very poisonous, and you could die. So you really have
Well,
to.
it's that is a factor. I would say that for anybody, who's interested, uh, get this book. It's called All That the Rain Promises and More by David Aurora. Okay. Um,
Nice. Yeah, we'll
this is
put that
gonna
up on our screen. We'll
yeah,
find
this
a
this
picture of
is
that.
really gonna help folks out. It fits in your pocket. This is the like
Nice.
classic West Coast mushroom foraging guidebook, and there's no question that this belongs in every single person's library.
I
Even
love
if
it.
you don't know a lot about mushrooms, just to have on your bookshelf here. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, it's an incredible resource, and
Cool.
and
What are you?
really will help.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it'll really help, familiarize you with the main things that you'd be looking for, and helping to separate from something that would potentially be harmful. I would say that in terms of like edible and medicinal mushrooms, things like chanterelles, porcini, morels, things like this that we go and forage in the woods for. Most of those things are pretty distinctive and hard to
Mm,
mistake for things that are quite harmful. On the other hand, things like you had mentioned when we spoke off camera, the magic mushrooms, which we do have here
which I'd like to
in the
get
Pacific.
into if you don't mind,
Sure.
because I have
Let me
particular interest in that. But go ahead.
yeah, let me give the lead in here is that
Mhm.
with those there are some lookalikes that are harmful, and those are things that you got to be really familiar with. Don't take a chance on eating
Right.
something out in the out in the field that you're not completely certain of. A great
Well, what
resource
do you think?
is
Speaking of that, what do you think about the new apps, the Mushroom Finder apps? So do you think? What do you think of those?
I wouldn't use that.
Okay.
I mean, maybe as like a real general baseline,
Right. Okay.
but there are groups on Facebook. There's a group called the PNW Mushroom Foraging and Identification Group, who actually the author of this book participates in somewhat regularly,
Okay.
and there are some regional experts that
I will
and
definitely
myself
join that
myself
today.
included.
Right. Right.
Yeah, who what you do is you post pictures of various if you're wanting an identification, you need to post a photo of the top of the mushroom, the underneath of the cap of the mushroom, the stem of the mushroom, and it's helpful even to take pictures of like a habitat that it's growing
Where
in and
where
the
it was
the
growing. Yeah.
trees around it. And if you post it into that group, there is going to be somebody that authoritatively knows what your mushroom is and will be able to identify it for you. And so I really it's an amazing resource, and I'm not like a huge social media guy, but that for people who really want to be able to directly interact with an expert here regional locally,
Hmm.
it can give you more information than just the book. So that's kind of like a good lead in that
So
people
most
that
people,
are interested.
we know of mushrooms that you put in your omelet or you cook with, and the basic ones, the brown button, the porcino, uh, they're
Portobello.
portobello,
Yeah.
but there's a porcino, isn't there?
Now
Portobello,
porcino, like
porcini, porcini.
those are mushrooms that you're rarely going to find in a store. Those are like super prized choice edible mushrooms that we find out in the forest that you
Okay.
may find in a farmer's market or something like that, or like in a high-end restaurant. But for the most part, what you buy in the store is a button mushroom, uh, portobello, baby bella. They're cremini. They're all the same species of mushrooms, just in different stages of growth. When
Mhm.
it's a small one, it's a button mushroom. When it's large, it's a portobello. But
Ah,
same mushroom.
know
Yeah.
that.
What about lion's mane? I just want to throw that in there.
Uh, One of the mushrooms that I find most fascinating for so many reasons. Lion's mane is a member of a group of species called Hericium. We have several different species in that group here in the Pacific Northwest. We have lion's mane, we have bear's head, which is its relative. We have the coral tooth, which is also another relative, and they all have they're delicious gourmet mushrooms, but also they have these very serious medicinal properties where they actually repair the myelin sheathing on our neurons in our brain
Ah,
and create new connections in our brain. There's a lot
do
of
you cook these or
speculation.
do you eat them raw?
The lion's mane,
Yes.
you cook them, although for
And they still can fix the myelins in the brain.
well, you're not going to consume enough, as a, kind of like a table mushroom, probably to
Okay.
get maximum benefit. What you're going to want is you're going to want like some kind of concentration, extraction, from the mushroom. And
Ah,
people cultivate unlike a porcini
oh,
or a
that's
lot of these
beautiful. That's beautiful.
unlike a lot of these mycorrhizal mushrooms, lion's manes are decomposers. Okay, so they're saprophytic mushrooms that grow on dead wood. So that means that we can cultivate those. Anything that grows not with the tree's roots, but that decomposes the wood or grows on manure. These are things that we can actually cultivate. So in terms of the lion's mane, most of the stuff that you're going to see in a store, at a farmer's market, or in a tincture or something like that, is something that has been cultivated
Mm.
in a facility, in order to get that. Most of them aren't wild foraged. However, we do have them here wild in the Pacific Northwest,
Okay.
and it's a real like pleasure to forage and find them. They're a real treat.
This is so
So
this is obviously information that we could get 4 or 5 shows off, but we got limited time. So
yeah, sorry about
let's
that.
get to what my audiences want me to talk about. um, the experience of people call it magic or shrooms or whatever you want to call it. What is the correct name for this? There's many.
Um,
I saw another documentary on Netflix with this Aurora person and other people and the teacher and all these people talking about the different kinds. There's not just one. There's another one that's kind of red with white dots, and if you take it, can really give you a bad experience. So you have to take a small amount. But
okay, so let me try to help clarify.
yeah, please.
What you're talking about, in terms of like the sacred mushrooms, or
Sure.
magic mushrooms, are a genus of mushrooms called psilocybe, which refers to the fact that they contain psilocybin and psilocin, which are the two of the psychoactive alkaloids
Mhm.
that are contained in the mushrooms. Now, the genus covers many different species that are found throughout the world. Okay, here in the Pacific Northwest, the ones that we have native are
Mhm.
known as Psilocybe azurescens and Psilocybe cyanescens, both Latin names referring to blue, which means the mushrooms themselves turn blue because that is the medicine inside of it expressing itself.
Wow.
So that's
Wow.
when you're looking to identify them in the wild, one of
Mhm.
the main features is that they turn blue when you touch them. Okay, so
Oh,
and
wow.
that's across
That's
the
crazy.
spectrum of the whole genus. So most of what folks are familiar with and what most people like consume and have access to is called Psilocybe cubensis. And Psilocybe cubensis grows in equatorial regions around the whole globe, subtropical. Like, for example, here in the southeastern United States, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, they're prolific. They grow on cow manure and pastures. Okay, and these are mushrooms that we can cultivate indoors domestically. Okay,
That's what I was wanting to get
by
to
by
also is that
collecting
how
by
to cultivate.
collecting their spores, by
Right.
taking tissue culture.
Sure.
You can propagate these types of mushrooms to grow indoors, whereas the species that are native here in the Pacific Northwest, there's really no opportunity to do that. They grow on wood. They are wood decomposers, but they specifically need very cold temperatures to fruit,
Uh,
and they are not conducive to the cultivation, domestic cultivation.
ah, interesting. Wow. So, my curiosity is I just recently had tried um, some of this psilocybin. Um, I don't know which form of mushroom it was, but I was given some, tried it, and it was quite an experience. For me, the person had given me a few caps, 4 caps and 4 stems or whatever. I had no idea. And he says, just take 2 and tell me how you feel now from now. And he left, went across the street. So I took 4 and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. And he says, really? Well, that would have given me, somebody who does these things on a regular basis, a nice little feeling. Did nothing for me. So he goes, hang on, I'll be right back. He says, maybe you're one of those people who has a brain that's already on fire. Is that possible? I don't know. That some people need a little bit more. So he brings over what he called an eighth, and he said, take a quarter of this, tonight, and let me know how you feel. I took half of it, half of the eighth. Nothing happened. So I took the other half. And about an hour later, it's like, oh, and then I laid down all night, and for like 6 hours, I saw things I never even knew were possible to see with the mind. So, some people, when I described it, I don't want to bore my audience with what I went through, said, well, that's a bad trip. To me, it didn't feel like a bad trip. It was revelatory. It's the ego, the death, the surrender. It was beautiful. So, I mean,
Yeah, I think that's some folks are looking for just like kind of like a party sort of thing,
mhm,
or whatever. I think that the real way that these things are intended to be used
mhm,
is in a ceremonial way,
right.
to access deeper levels of understanding about the nature of reality, of the spiritual realm, our ourselves,
Mm,
our relationships with others, our relationship to nature. I think
mm,
that this is what this does. And I guess being a professional, I'd love to address it and
I
mention
understand. Yeah.
that, okay, when you talk about, well, I took this many or this much, there is a huge variation of, it's genetic variation. It's just like with cannabis or tomatoes or whatever, all of these things that people cultivate, and some have certain traits. Some are more potent, some are less potent, some look a certain way, some look another way. So it sounds to me like these probably weren't very
Correct.
potent,
Right.
mushrooms.
Exactly. I had to take
And there
8.
you have
I
it.
took a whole Ziploc bag full of them before I felt something.
And so that's something that, for people that aren't very familiar, aren't very aware, just want to caution that there's not a real good rule of thumb of like how strong these things are, because of the prohibition status. We can't send it to a testing lab like we can a bag of weed or whatever, and know,
Okay.
hey, this is the percentage of psilocybin, this is the percentage of psilocin, this is how much you need to take to get to this level 1, level 2,
Right.
level 3, etc.
Yeah.
So for me, I always do recommend, and it sounds like your friend, gave you good advice to start with like a small amount. I personally always have a digital scale that I would weigh
Uh,
the
wow.
material on and know exactly how much I'm taking. Start with like a half a gram, get a baseline, figure out what you have, and how that affects you. And then remember, you can always take more, but you can never take less. And so I say these kinds of things so that people have like the best possible outcome of an experience, and don't get overwhelmed and don't get scared, and are able to like work up to higher levels of experience, that they can access the things that you're talking about, these types of spiritual
Yeah.
experiences, these types of
And
things
I
to
never thought
kind
that
of
was
get
possible.
outside of themselves, to
Right.
have these revelatory
Astral travel. Mm,
visions and things like
mm,
this. Yes. So,
mm.
but there are all levels of experience. One of the things that folks, have gotten into, that's popular now, is microdosing, where
Right.
people are taking, very small amounts deliberately, but consistently, to, get, a boost. When I mentioned the kind of like neurogenerative properties of lion's mane, psilocybin has a similar property where it actually creates new neural connections and new neural pathways in your brain. And so even small amounts can produce this effect.
That's what I'm
And
interested in. Yes, for sure.
so that's what a lot of folks are doing. Although at the same time, like a one larger, dose, can have the same effect over a period of time. So there's different approaches.
What would you
Some
recommend?
people,
Yeah, what would you recommend personally? Because the actual microdosing, that's fine if you want to listen to like some Sonlux or some glass animals on your headphones and like really see the music. That was a beautiful experience when I lower dosed a second time, and it just was a mellow thing, and you could really, really get into music. I mean, you heard and saw everything as you were listening to it. The brain was immediately giving you visuals to what you were hearing. That was a wonderful experience, but what's your advice to someone like myself who wants the shamanistic ayahuasca, wants the deep spiritual connection to universe? What would
okay.
you say to someone like me who how many times is it,
Well, first and foremost, that when we talk about like microdosing, we're usually talking about like a sub-threshold, level of, intake, where you're actually not really getting high enough to, see visuals with the music or things like this. People want to, consume an amount that they can like still function and go to work and do their
right,
like daily routines and get just kind of like a little, boost,
little,
mood enhancer, or just getting the like physical effects of creating the new neural
they're
pathways
going
in
for
their brain
the long
with,
haul
with,
to reach. Yeah,
without actually feeling the effects of the
got it,
psilocybin,
got it.
as opposed to, like deliberately, taking a quantity that you're hoping to get high off of, or to, have a type of spiritual experience, etc. Also, comparing it to ayahuasca, it's really different. So I would
Yeah,
encourage not doing that.
don't do that.
It's its own thing. They are very similar, chemically similar, in terms of the chemical compound of DMT and psilocybin. However, ayahuasca has a whole other compound, a whole other aspect to it, that is not tryptamine based, and they're really not the same. So in other words, I would say, not to compare one to the other. But for me personally, I think that like the best way to use it, instead of like, very minuscule amounts on a prolonged daily basis, is to go ahead and go deep. If you are
Agreed. Much agreed.
mentally and emotionally prepared for such a thing, I wouldn't encourage anybody who has, kind of like mental,
Somebody that'll
emotional
freak out. Yeah.
disorders. Yeah,
People who want to control are going to have a bad trip. If you know how to not control and just let go
that's
and just
that's
surrender and die to yourself.
that's a very good way to describe it. It's You can't fight against it, because that's when people get bad trips.
Oh,
Okay,
I felt it. I
that's
felt the
the
need
bad
to
trip.
fight. There was a moment where I was like, it's 4 hours. I'm tired. I'm yawning. I want this to stop. And I almost got freaked out. And I said
Yep.
no. And that's when I really just surrendered. And then it was beautiful. It was just,
That's Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it, is to like surrender, and then you just let it happen to you. And if you see things that you're uncomfortable with, like, that's okay. You're supposed to,
that's
like, not all of it is pretty.
no, it wasn't. There was a lot of
Existence
ugly.
isn't pretty.
It was beautiful.
There, right there, right.
So
It is
beautiful.
the horrific beauty of existence, right?
Of
You see
seeing your
these,
skin just decay and your bones melting away and you're in a coffin dead and you're just decaying. It was beautiful. I've never seen anything like that.
Well, and everybody
Beautiful.
sees it and experiences it in a different way. But yes, it, like, peels back kind of the facade, and that you see,
The
like,
illusion. The
a
illusion.
truer, more distilled version of existence, that it is like beautiful and also horrifying at the same time. Simultaneously, these things exist
It truly
together.
was. You know how we're always reading the books for consciousness, enlightenment, the Buddha, Zen. I'm deep into whatever. Um, it really it really did bring me to full surrender. It really opened me to a world I heard about, spirit world. I didn't really understand it until I was surrounded by everything that was talking to me. The universe really was in front of me, and it changed me. It definitely had a huge effect on me. I can't even explain it. It's like describe love. It's it's the great I am, something that cannot be described with words, and that's how I feel about this experience. So
Well, I think anybody that's had the experience understands exactly what you're saying. You don't need the words, and that's what
yeah,
these experiences do for
exactly.
us. Is like they teach us, without words, and that's kind of the take home. The thing to me that's been so amazing, and it's been a real journey for me, is that the psilocybin really opened me up to like the whole world, the natural world, and
Natural world,
mushrooms, and mushrooms, and the way that they relate to
the connectivity.
nature, and and connect plants and trees and humans and animals, and all this stuff. And it got me going out into the woods looking for mushrooms initially,
Beautiful.
for like trying to find the psilocybin mushrooms and stuff, and then learning more about the gourmet mushrooms, the medicinal mushrooms, and going out into the forest and learning. What it's done to me is that it's drawn me into these places, and I've learned about the forest.
Magical, mystical world.
I've learned about the trees. I learned
Yes.
which trees host the different mushrooms. I've learned which animals are there that eat the mushrooms and carry the spores. What my role in doing that is, like, it's a really powerful thing, because the first level is that it gets you to look at yourself, look at your relationship to the universe and things like this. But then
Yes.
then
Yeah.
the lasting impact, and there actually have been studies, is that psilocybin experiences have this feature where they get people who use them interested in nature and spending time in nature. And it's just like, it's this
I'll
prevalent
offer
feature
that.
that literally the university studies have vetted out, that this is this thing that initiates a new type of connection between us and the world around us. And
Amen. Well,
that's
I want to talk more about this. I'd love to hang out with you. Unfortunately, I'm being waved off here, Russ. I mean, I really appreciate your time, Russell, very much. I'd love to talk more with you if you have time. I'd love to get to know your world. Maybe you could take me out. I promise I wouldn't tell anybody anything. I'm not a professional wannabe, doing that world.
well,
But yeah, this has been wonderful. I'm glad to finally meet you. Justin has told me so much about you. You're a wonderful human being. Thank you. And yeah, so
well, it's my pleasure, and thanks for having me on. I know that there's just kind of such a broad range of material to address and talk about. And so,
yes,
if you
sure.
ever want to do this again, and
Oh, absolutely.
figure out some specific things, and
We'll
we
go
can direct
over.
the
Yeah,
conversation that way.
we'll figure it out. Exactly. Absolutely.
Because I have some cool stuff to tell people. People are
Let's do
getting
it again. Let's
interested
do
in
a part
learning.
two.
So
Let's do a
I would
part
love
two.
to.
I knew there would be a lot more to get that we couldn't get in one show. Let's do a part two for sure.
Cheers.
We'll work that out.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. Have a great day.
Russell,
Okay.
once again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you
My
for everything.
pleasure.
All right. Be
Take
well.
care. Bye.
Bye bye. Well, people, this is Ray Lane with Halfcast. That was Russell Glaser, mycologist. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's a very fascinating conversation. And y'all be well out there, and I'll see you again next week. This is Ray Lane with Halfcast on TalkCastPDX.com.